Hi, I'm Stella.
And I'm Tarrant, and this is Meeple University's How to Play Tiny Epic Zombies. Tiny Epic Zombies is a cooperative or semi-cooperative game set during the zombie apocalypse. 1 to 4 players will play the role of survivors attempting to defend the local shopping mall from these cute little zombies, which may or may not be controlled by a human player. Players need to move around within the mall and balance the objectives of keeping themselves alive, killing zombies, defending the survivors who are holed up in the central courtyard, and advancing these special objectives, which are selected at the start of the game. The game plays in several modes. When playing cooperatively, players need to band together to complete these 3 objectives in order to win the game. When playing competitively or semi-cooperatively, players do need to keep each other alive, but are striving to claim the glory by completing the objectives before the other players. The zombies, which can be controlled by a human player in a 1 versus many format, or which can be controlled by the game, will win if they can break down into the central courtyard and kill off all of the survivors, or if the human players haven't won before this deck of cards runs out. The game can be played in a total of 5 different modes, accommodating a player count between 1 and 5. The game can be played cooperatively among the human players, with the zombies controlled either by a player or by the game. It can be played competitively or semi-cooperatively between the human players, again with the zombie being controlled by a player or being controlled by the game. And it can be played solo, which is much like playing cooperatively, except the solo player controls multiple players. In this video, we'll be primarily talking about the competitive with player-controlled zombie mode. That is mode number 1. And we'll come back at the end and talk about the differences on how to play the other modes. If you want to skip straight ahead to that section, you can click on the timestamp in the description for the video. I'm going to take you through all of the steps of setup because there are quite a few steps and some of them are a little bit fiddly. First, you want to set up the mall. Take the 9 store tiles and find the courtyard tile. If you're playing in cooperative mode or competitive mode, choose the relevant side and then place it in the center of the table. Then, for the remaining stores, randomize which side you'll be using for each of them, and then shuffle them up and lay them out in the following configuration. First, lay out 4 stores vertically like so. Then, place the other 4 horizontally like so. Next, make sure the orientation of each of these cards is valid. Each of these cards represents a store within the mall, and within each store you will find 3 rooms separated by these walls. One of these rooms, indicated by this brightly coloured icon in the corner, is the entrance room for that store. And the entrance room must have a wall. It does not have to be the one showing a door in the graphics, it simply has to be a wall that is on the outer edge of your mall. So check all of your cards to make sure they're in this configuration. And in this case, the entrance room for this store is fully interior. So rotate it until it has a valid configuration. Shuffle up the character cards and then deal 3 zombie side up to the zombie player. The player then chooses which one he or she wishes to play, returning the others to the pile, and places a lime green horde cube on the number 1 space of the horde track. Then deal 3 characters to each human player, and each will choose one, removing the others from the game. Each player then takes a bullet token, placing it on the 9, a wound token, placing it on the 0, and a meeple matching the colour of the wound token. Each character has the same basic attributes, but has a special power, both on the human and zombie sides, which distinguishes them from each other. Next, you'll need to set up 2 decks of search cards in the following specific way. Take all of these cards and sort them by the icon in the top right-hand corner, not the top left-hand corner. You'll have 4 stacks, the green ones, which are your weapons, the blue ones, which are your backpack items, the purple ones, which are your pickup items, and the exclamation mark is the events. take the green and blue ones, shuffle them together, and then deal out 12 into a pile. This is called the supply deck and sits off to the side. Then shuffle all of the remaining cards together. This should be a deck of 24, which you then give to the zombie player. Then shuffle up the 9 objective cards and deal 3 out next to the board. If you're playing cooperative, use the cooperative side, and if you're playing competitive, use the competitive side. Next, set up all of the pieces onto the main board. In the courtyard, place each player's meeple, place 2 survivor tokens, and take the barricade token and place it on the number 2. In each of the 8 entrances of the board, you will place 1 zombie. Like so. Find the store with arm a trap as its action, take the 2 trap tokens and place them next to it. Find the 2 rooms that have a numbered crate drawn on them, and then place the corresponding crate tokens in those rooms. Find this store, and if you're using the side that says motorcycle, place the motorcycle next to the board, or if you're using the side that says police car, place the police car there. Then follow the setup steps for each of your 3 objectives. Some will require cubes in order to track your progress in these objectives, and for this you use cubes in player colours. It does not matter which colours you use, as long as you're not using the zombies' cubes. And some will require tokens that are placed onto the main board. Some of the objective tokens will have a specific place identified for them, and others will go at entrances or into specific stores, depending on the card. Once you're finished setup, you may still have some grayed out icons on the board which relate to objectives that aren't in the game, and you will ignore those. To complete setup, the zombie player draws a hand of 8 cards from his or her search deck, looks through them, and chooses one to give face down to each of the human players in the game. The rest of the cards remain in the zombie player's hand, and this will be a different number depending on how many human players are in the game. The human players may not look at their cards, and we'll go through the mechanism of how these come into play later, but the important thing for setup is that the players do not look at the face down cards. Tiny Epic Zombies begins with a human player taking a turn, then the zombies, then the next human, then the zombies again, and so on, with the zombies always alternating with a human. On a human's turn, he or she moves 3 times through the mall into adjacent rooms. Every time a meeple enters a room, it may then take actions, including killing zombies and interacting with the spaces. After a player has moved 3 times, he or she flips over the face down card which was given to him or her by the zombie. This is then dropped in that space to end the player's turn. The zombies will then add more zombies to the board and choose a new card to give to that player for the next turn. Play then passes to the next human. Once the zombie player has exhausted all of his or her cards, he or she draws another 4 to continue playing. Once the zombie is completely out of cards and the final face down card has been played, the end of the game is triggered, and each human player takes 1 more turn without the zombies acting, and then the game is over. If the humans have not completed their 3 objectives at this point, the zombie wins the game. So now let's look at a player turn in more detail. On a player's turn, he or she must move 3 times, no more and no fewer, unless there is a specific effect which changes the number of moves. In the game, whenever a player is instructed to take a move, this also allows a player not only to move to an adjacent room, but then to interact with that room. First by killing 1 zombie, and then, if the entire store in which that room is located is free of zombies, the player may interact with any number of tokens, printed effects, and pick up any number of cards in that store as he or she is able to do. The player must take 3 moves in a turn and may take these actions in any room through which he or she passes. After taking 3 actions, the player reveals his or her search card and drops it in the room that he or she is currently located. Play then passes to the zombies. One important clarification is that a player must move and then act. If a player began his or her turn in this situation, he or she would not be able to kill this zombie and interact with this room before moving. The player must move first and must always remain on the move. Next, we'll take you through those 4 steps of a single move action. Moving from room to room, killing a zombie, interacting with tokens and printed effects on the space, and searching for cards. First, I'll take you through moving from room to room. A single movement point allows you to move into any adjacent room with which your current room shares a flat wall. Now this can be a little bit confusing when you first see it on the board, because you will see various doors and crumbled walls drawn on these specific cards. These are purely artistic. You can treat each of these rooms as a space that is closed off, and you can move to any adjacent space. So as I move the meeple around, all of these are considered legal moves. When you're moving into the courtyard, you'll see that this has some additional walls, and the courtyard card has 5 rooms on it. So to move into the central part of the courtyard will require 2 movement points. The other type of movement action allows you to move from one secret passage to the other. However, because this is a printed effect on the floor of a card, you must be in a store with no zombies in order to utilize that secret passage. Next, I'll talk about killing zombies. At the end of each of your moves, you may kill exactly 1 zombie, even if there are multiple zombies within your range of attack. You may kill zombies in one of 2 ways, by a melee attack or by a ranged attack. If you enter a room which contains a zombie, you must kill it by a melee attack. If you're in a room with no zombies, you may kill a zombie in an adjacent room with a ranged attack. To make a melee attack on a zombie in your room, roll the melee die. Regardless of its outcome, you will kill that zombie. Then take the effect of the die and apply it. If you get this side, you take 1 wound from the battle. And if you roll this side, you would take 2 wounds from the battle. If you roll a grey head, there is no additional effect. And if you roll a green head, you get an overkill. When you get an overkill, you may immediately take an additional move. This will increase the number of moves that you can take on that turn and will allow you to kill zombies or interact with things in the new room you've moved to. However, if you do take this option, you will give up the opportunity to interact with anything else in the room that you left. The second way to kill a zombie is with a ranged attack. And if you've moved into a room with no zombies, you may spend 1 ammo in order to shoot a zombie in an adjacent room. The zombie will always die, and you will not take any damage by doing this. If your wound and ammo tokens ever meet, you will be eaten alive by the zombies. And so when you perform melee attacks, you may take more damage, but you may be safe, whereas with every bullet you fire, you will come closer to death. I'll talk more about what happens when the zombies eat you later on in the video. After moving and killing a zombie, if there's a zombie around, the player has the opportunity to interact with the room in which he or she is located. However, he or she may only do this if there are no zombies still in the entire store in which he or she is located. So in this case here, the player could not interact with this room. But if this zombie had already been killed in a previous turn, then the player could interact with this room. There are several different types of effect that you can interact with in these rooms. If there are tokens on a space, those will relate to one of your objectives. And so in this case, for example, you could flip that token to interact with it. You can also interact with effects that are printed on the cards. If they're showing this yellow running icon, you can interact with that effect and then continue your turn afterwards. However, if you interact with a space with a red stop sign on it, even if you have movement points remaining, you must stop your turn there. There are several different types of effects on the board. There are many which allow you to pick up extra ammunition from the stores. This one will allow you to arm traps, which will kill zombies for you without your action. And the motorcycle and police car will give you extra flexibility in movement. There are 2 spaces on the board which will allow you to pick up these supplies, which you can then carry back to the courtyard in the middle of the board. When you drop supplies off in the courtyard, the token goes back where it came from and you strengthen your barricade by 2 steps. Then, after strengthening the barricade, immediately draw the top card from the supply deck. This was the deck of 12 cards that we set up at the start of the game, not the 24 cards which are held by the zombie player. And then immediately equip that card to your character. And we'll talk more about how the cards work a little bit later. You can also heal 2 wounds in the center of the courtyard, and this is the only place on the board where you can heal your wounds. After you've interacted with any actions or tokens in a room, you may, again if there are no zombies in the entire store, collect any items which happen to be in that store. And these will be cards that have been placed there during previous turns on the game. So the green player in this situation could collect all 3 of these items. If you pick up a backpack item, place it into your character's backpack. You can discard this at any point on a subsequent turn in order to take its effect. If you pick up a pickup item, discard it immediately and take its effect. You cannot hang on to this for later, so you must time collecting it for when it's most useful to you. Finally, if you pick up a weapon, you can equip it to your character. You may only hold 1 melee weapon and 1 ranged weapon, so if you pick up one that you'd prefer, you must drop the one that you already have. Then take the corresponding item and equip it to the hand of your Meeple. This makes it look super cool. Each weapon will improve your ability to kill zombies. At any point on your turn, you may drop an item or weapon back down into the store where you are currently located, allowing another player to come along on a subsequent turn and pick it up. Players cannot hand items to each other, and the transfer must occur by dropping and picking up. Players cannot leave items in the courtyard, and if they wish to drop an item from there, it must be placed into one of the 4 adjacent stores. Once a player has taken his or her 3 moves and interacted with the rooms as desired, the player flips over his or her search card that was given to him or her by the zombie. If this is an item of any type, it is then dropped in the store where the player is currently located. This is considered to be the player searching this room for that item, but then being interrupted by zombies and being unable to pick it up. The player must remember to drop this item. It can be very tempting to simply say, "Ooh, now I've got an assault rifle," and equip it. But that's not what happens. It gets dropped in the room where the player is located. As was the case for dropping items, if the player ends his or her turn in any of the courtyard rooms, then the item that is drawn from the search deck is placed in any one of the 4 adjacent stores of the player's choice. The other type of search card that a player may flip is an event, and there are 4 of these in the deck, and these will either cause explosions or bring new zombies out, which will generally hurt the player. When this is drawn, resolve it immediately and then discard it. After the human player has finished his or her turn, it's time for the zombie to play. Let's say it was Green's turn and this was the card that was flipped up, being dropped in this store. To start the zombie player's turn, check the color of the icon in the search card that was just flipped. If it matches the store in which that player is currently located, the player has made too much noise and attracted more zombies. The zombie player may immediately enact the Horde effect, which is printed next to the current location of the cube, and this will vary depending on which zombie character is in effect. Then move the horde token one space up. If the players collectively continue to make more noise, the zombie will get more and more powerful effects. These horde effects come in various shapes and sizes, and I'll leave you to read them for yourself off the cards. Then, regardless of whether or not this symbol matched, the zombie player adds 2 zombies to the board in stores matching the colour of the card that was flipped. So in this case, the zombie player could add those zombies in those 2 locations. There are several ways that a zombie player may do this, and there are a few restrictions on how it occurs. The zombie may add both zombies to different rooms in the same store, or may split them across the 2 stores with that entrance type. When adding zombies to a store, the zombie player must first add to the lowest available numbered room, that is from the entrance and heading in. In this scenario, the zombie player could not place this zombie before this one. If the zombie player wishes to add zombies to a corner store which is full, he or she may instead place the zombie in the lowest numbered space of the next store clockwise. This is true even if there is room in the other matching store type. Finally, if the zombie player wishes to add zombies into a center store which is full, he or she does not add an extra zombie to the board, but attacks the barricade in the courtyard, lowering it by 1 step. Once again, the zombie player may do this even if there is space in the other matching store of that type. If a zombie is ever added to a room where a player's meeple is currently located, that player is overrun and takes 1 wound. If a zombie ever needs to be placed but the zombie player has run out of zombie meeples, simply deal a wound to the player who currently has the fewest wounds, and in the event of a tie, the player with the most ammo, and if still tied, the players choose who takes the wound. To end his or her turn, the zombie player looks through the remaining cards in his or her hand and then chooses one to give face down and secretly to the player whose turn it just was. Since the zombie player gets the most benefit by having the store icon on the card match that player's location, he or she will typically be trying to give cards that will match the rooms where he or she thinks the player will be on the next turn. Once the zombie player has given away all of these cards, he or she draws a new hand of 4 to start dealing out from the next turn. There are 2 main things that can go wrong for the human players during the game. The first is being eaten alive, and this occurs whenever the wound token meets or crosses the ammo token. If this happens, take the following steps. Drop any items that player is carrying in the room where he or she was eaten. Take the player's character card, flip it over, and give it to the zombie player, placing a new horde cube onto it. The zombie player now has additional passive powers and additional horde powers that he or she can use during the game. The player who died ends his or her turn, flipping over this card as usual and dropping it in the location where he or she died. The player then takes a new character card, resets his or her wounds and ammo to 0 and 9, moves his or her meeple to the courtyard, and discards one of the survivors. If there are no survivors left to discard, then the human team loses immediately and the zombie wins. The second thing that can go wrong for the human players is that the zombies break down the barricade and get into the courtyard. Anytime the zombie player attempts to add zombies to a center store that is already full, instead of placing a zombie, the player drops the barricade by 1 step. If the barricade ever reaches 0, the zombie player gets to remove one of the survivors from the courtyard and then reset the barricade to 2. If there are no survivors to remove, the zombie player wins immediately. The game will end in one of 3 ways. If the human players complete all 3 of their objectives, then the game ends immediately and the human players win. If the zombie player either eats a character alive or breaks down the barricade and there are no survivor tokens left to remove from the courtyard, then the zombie player wins immediately. Finally, if the last card is flipped over and dropped in wherever that player is located, then the zombie player takes one more turn, and then each of the human players takes one more turn without the zombie player acting, and the game ends. And if the human players have not completed their objectives by that point, then the zombie player wins. Next, we'll go through how to play the competitive mode of the game. In competitive play, most of the gameplay occurs the same way as it did in cooperative mode, but each player will be separately attempting to complete a modified version of each of the 3 objectives for himself or herself, and the first player to complete all 3 objectives wins the game. However, the zombie player now needs only to kill one of the 3 human players outright in order to win the game, and so the humans still need to work semi-cooperatively to keep each other alive while competing to beat these objectives alone. To set up for the competitive mode of the game, use the competitive side of each of the 3 objective cards, and then place 1 cube of each of the competing players' colours onto each card. These will track the objectives separately for each player. Use the competitive side of the courtyard, and then give each player 1 survivor, or in a 2-player game, give each player 2 survivors. Otherwise, the setup is the same as for cooperative mode. Other than these changes to setup, and the fact that these objectives work a little bit differently in the competitive mode compared with the cooperative mode, there's only really one rule change that you need to know for the competitive mode of play, and that is how you deal with the survivors in the courtyard. Anytime a player is eaten alive by zombies, you will go through the normal process that you go through in cooperative mode, handing over that zombie card to the new zombie and giving the player a new character. However, that player loses his or her own survivor token instead of one from a collective pile. Then, if the zombies ever break through the barricade, one of the players who still has a survivor token needs to lose it. And to choose which player, you look at which of the players who still have survivor tokens has the fewest wounds. In the event of a tie, whoever has the most ammunition left, and if still tied, whoever's next in turn order. That player then loses his or her survivor. The zombie player's win conditions then change slightly. The zombie wins if he or she eats alive any player who no longer has a survivor in the courtyard, or if all of the survivors are removed from the courtyard. And this is slightly distinct from the cooperative mode, where if you lost all of the survivors from the courtyard, the zombie would still need to eat alive or break through one more time to win the game. The zombie's other win condition, that all of the search cards have been revealed and no human player has yet won the game, remains the same as it does in the cooperative mode. A human player wins immediately if he or she completes all 3 objectives. Next, I'll go through the rule changes required in order to play the game with a game-controlled zombie instead of a human-controlled zombie. To set up for this, you simply deal out 1 zombie card because there's no one to take the choice of 3, and you do not use the Horde cube because the Horde effects, printed in white, are not used by the game-controlled zombie. However, you must take note of what the passive effect, written in the red box, is, and players must make sure they apply this during the game. Then, because there's no zombie player to have a hand of search cards, players simply take their face-down search cards from the top of the search deck. At the end of each human player's turn, the search card is flipped and dropped as usual, and then if the player does not make noise, that is, if the symbol does not match the room in which the player is located, then the game-controlled zombie adds 1 zombie into each of the stores with that icon. The game-controlled zombie does not have the choice to add both zombies to the same room. If the human player does make noise, that is, the symbol matches, then instead of a horde effect, the game-controlled zombie adds 2 zombies to each room matching that colour, instead of 1. Otherwise, all of the rules including the win and loss conditions for the human players, are the same with a game-controlled zombie as they are with a player-controlled zombie. Finally, the game can be played solo, and the rules for playing solo are exactly the same as playing with 2 players and a game-controlled zombie. You simply have a single player controlling both of these characters.
And that's how to play Tiny Epic Zombies. We hope that you enjoyed the video, and we hope that you enjoy playing it.
And please click on the Meeple to subscribe to our channel if you'd like to hear more from Meeple University.